Welcome, everybody, to this very special edition of JFK Live. A lot's been happening in the world of JFK, and we are here to talk about it with one of the people who is making it happen, Representative Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, chair of the House Task Force on Declassification. The Congresswoman and I are going to talk for a while, half hour, 45 minutes, and then we'll take questions, which you can enter in the chat, whether you are watching us via Zoom or whether you are watching us via YouTube. We'll be watching both of those chat groups. So if you have a question for us or a comment, those are welcome, and we will get to those at the end of the conversation. So just to review the events of the week, a big hearing on Tuesday, where Oliver Stone and Jim DiEugenio and I testified before Representative Luna's task force on declassification and presented a lot of, new information, certainly new information for the news media, for the Congress, for the audience, and the audience at home. I focused on findings from the latest JFK files that were only released on March 18th. And now Representative Luna is with us. Anna, welcome.
Hey, sorry about that. I was having some technical difficulties.
We all are. So it's kind of the story of life these days, but we have overcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I was just talking a little bit about the hearing, and let's start right into it. We had a big hearing. Oliver Stone, Jim DiEugenio, and I all testified. You and your colleagues asked questions. So I want to get to that. But first, I want to introduce you to our audience. JFK Facts has about 20,000 subscribers now. Intensely interested in the JFK story just by nature. If you sign up, it's pretty much you're interested. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Who are your parents? How'd you come to politics?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California, and my background is probably not like most people who get into politics. I didn't have, like a political dynasty. I'm not from a lot of money. Definitely never thought that politics would be something that I would get into. I eventually, after joining the military, really had the objective of applying to medical school. And during my gap year, I started volunteering as a counter-trafficking activist. And so that's ultimately what got me involved in politics. No one really tells you how to run for office. It kind of is something that you either know people that know how to do it, or you have to figure it out on your own. So I figured it out on my own. And as you're seeing now, I did put an emphasis on grassroots. So I basically door knocked my way into my election.
Uh-huh.
But, politics, there's a lot of money that goes into it. So I'm probably a more grassroots candidate than most people in Washington, D.C. So definitely never expected to be here, and still don't plan on making this a full-time, permanent career. And so the way that I feel is that I could probably do a lot of good, do a lot of good in the time that I have there. And I never take it for granted, which is ultimately why I think I started getting interested in really helping to expose what had happened with John F. Kennedy and why we really took on the task force the way that we did. As you know, Representative Burchett said that we really kind of had to fight tooth and nail for this task force. But when, the declassification order came through, I was actually kind of surprised that more people weren't interested in running the task force. And I think, like many whistleblowers and also to, a lot of the witnesses, for example, that we asked to testify in the hearing, people kind of get spooked by stuff like this. And
Yeah.
so I did a little bit at first, but I'm okay now.
Yeah. I was going to ask, how did the task force come together? It's a task force of the Oversight Committee. So was this Chairman Comer's idea? Was this your idea? How did it?
We were kind of talking about it on the House floor all together. It was, I think, Representative Comer, Burleson, myself, Burchett, and it more or less kind of developed because of a conversation where there was a bunch of stuff coming out with the declassification, and then also to some other subjects that we had looked into specifically in regards to UAPs, et cetera. And so we realized with the declass efforts, we've always seen stonewalling in a certain aspect. So we wanted to make sure that there was an arm of Congress that could enforce, or really, I think, be the pit bull for the declassification efforts because you need that sometimes. It's good
Yes.
now that we have, like-minded people in these different positions, but we didn't know to what extent they're going to be helpful when this first fleshed out. And so that's really kind of where the task force came from.
Yeah. So I thought it was very appropriate that you started with JFK. It's historically it's the oldest of all the controversies and
Mhm.
really, kind of foundational in America's trust in government and all sorts of issues. But you're taking on a lot of high profile topics in a short time. You've got assassinations, RFK, MLK, JFK, origins of COVID, Epstein files, and UAP. Can you really get all of that done in 6 months?
Well, we're going to try. I think what's been interesting is, specific to a lot of the stuff that you named, the
Yeah.
executive order covers JFK, MLK, and RFK, but it doesn't cover the other items that we are pushing for declassification on. Now, in regards to the Epstein files, I mean, that should have been released day one. So I can tell you that I've publicly been pretty critical about the release process, but also too, I'm being told that they're still going through documents, whatever that is. I understand redactions for victims, but I also understand that if we don't arrest people that did bad things, then ultimately justice is not blind in this country, and so that's a really important topic. But specific to, JFK, MLK, RFK, I think that there needs to be probably an extension of the task force to address all the topics. And even though we had the first hearing, doesn't mean that we're not going to be doing follow-up and then also to roundtables on JFK to ensure that more information is flushing out. What's been interesting, though, is to kind of see the media reaction. So I thought, and I think that your testimony was um, pretty mind-blowing in regards to some of the information coming out, but it was interesting to see some of the spin that was still there in the mainstream media, more or less saying that these were conspiracy theories when they're not. These are actually declassified documents from the CIA that are stating what everything that you outlined, and they were trying to frame it as if we were pushing a conspiracy theory. So that's always an interesting thing to kind of sit to see who's trying to poo-poo the new information. And I think that you handled it brilliantly when you were hit with some of these questions. And so, I applaud your work and also the work of Mr. Stone and everyone else involved. But it is interesting, to see how they try to spin the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, a familiar phenomenon us JFK researchers face all the time is the relentless effort to present factual information as a conspiracy theory. There's,
Mhm.
I find there's a lot of people out there who would rather talk about conspiracy theories than the actual facts. It's more fun and you don't really get tied down to reality. And I
Yeah.
think we saw some of that. But let me ask you this. How did you educate yourself?
A lot of honestly watching documentaries, my own research. I remember my dad telling me a story about when he was little that my grandma took him to see I believe it was JFK, it was one of the Kennedys in California. And so, at the time when I was younger, I didn't know that Kennedy was obviously like as a child, you're right, you don't know political affiliation, but I remember him telling me that story. And then as I got older and kind of just seeing really the legacy that Kennedy left behind, and then also to a lot of crossover with, young politicos, obviously me being a young politico, kind of looking into really it was, basically American's golden boy, and then seeing him murdered in the way that it was, it's always been kind of one of those things that everyone in politics knows about what happened to John F. Kennedy. There's kind of this unsaid understanding about the Kennedy dynasty. And so for me specifically on this topic, it's a lot of, me self-teaching, but I do that actually a lot with everything I do in Washington. So people, say, oh, how do you memorize? How do you understand this? And so I just do my own research.
Uh-huh. Tell me about your experience of the hearing. So, I mean, I'm up there giving testimony, Oliver Stone, Jim DiEugenio, and then we had questions from the audience. A lot of people watching, different
Mhm.
media coverage. Some people, some media coverage was great. People really got what we were talking about. Other people, but what did you come away with from the hearing?
I think it was a great committee hearing. I think a lot of information that historically was left unanswered was answered. And everything that you had stated actually when you went on Jesse Waters was, in my opinion, definitely what Americans suspected, but never had hard evidence of. I do wish that there were some questions that were not as partisan. I think that this was a great opportunity to really answer those facts. And, the interesting thing is like, obviously, you and I are kind of on opposite spectrums. And so I just hope that moving forward, people understand the gravity and the importance of this committee and task force and can keep it focused on the topics at hand. But I also too appreciate that from the JFK community and from people that actually understand the gravity of what this means for the United States and the long-term historical implications of all of this. I appreciate those people giving it a chance and really covering it in the way that it deserved justice. This is not going to be the only time that we address it. And obviously, we're going to be doing follow-up and chasing down some of those documents that you had listed. But it's definitely something that I think history will reflect. We're able to correct a lot of the wrong narratives that the Warren Commission put out because they either omitted evidence or did not have all the facts.
Yeah, I mean, when you canvass the JFK research community, and there's a
Mhm.
diversity of opinion, I would say, but I try to go out and talk to as many researchers as I know, and was asking them for suggestions of documents that should be pursued or topics
Mhm.
that should be pursued. I mean, and whatever the difference is, I mean, there's widespread belief that the Warren Commission account is simply not true. It wasn't three shots fired from behind by one guy who had no motive to kill the president, right?
Correct.
It doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense, and the evidence doesn't support it. And yet we have a lot of resistance to that. And I thought the hearing was a great breakthrough in that, this is a very reasonable factual position, no matter what some gatekeepers and guardians of the conventional wisdom want to say. So we did break through on that. Will we have another JFK hearing of the task force where more witnesses, more evidence will be presented?
Yeah, we're working on putting together a roundtable. So the hearings in the roundtables are pretty much the same. There's just a less formal gaveling and gaveling out process. But yeah, I think that that absolutely needs to be done, mainly because I think that there was a lot that we just couldn't get through in the rotations of questions that we had. And also, too, I mean, there were some great suggestions for new witnesses that are still alive from Mr. Stone. He actually suggested that we bring in, and I would love to have new witnesses. The one issue that we had, though, is that for a couple of people that we asked to testify, they got cold feet and they told me they would be happy to come and then they for whatever reason didn't, or they had conflicts. And so I'd like to bring those people in because I think that they are legitimate witnesses or legitimate people that can help further piece this together. And as Mr. Oliver Stone said, it's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes. You're going to have the information nuggets, you put it together, and then you find the fact pattern, like you say, and then you can actually draw a conclusion. But I think we know right now where this is leading. I think it's just kind of finalizing the process of putting those documents together and officially
Yeah.
calling it for what it is.
I talked to some people about appearing, and I don't want to use their names, but
Mhm.
you know, the format, 5 minutes. I mean, somebody like me, I'm a spokesman for a group. I can do a 5 minute statement, but for a
Yeah,
witness with a complex experience about a complex subject, I think the people I spoke to, it's just it wasn't enough. It wouldn't do it justice. They worry
that's what
about
the
the
roundtable
partisanship.
said. Yeah.
They worry about the partisanship, which we did see some of that. I think a roundtable format where
It's better.
a witness might have more time to, not get gavelled after 5 minutes, but be able to tell a story at
Mhm.
15 or 20 minutes might be a better format to really elicit some, information.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's also too, when you say, testify to Congress, people think they're in trouble too. And we don't want that to be the feeling that people get when we ask them to come talk to us. And so I think that that is also too a more welcoming way of bringing these people in that might have legitimate concerns, for whatever reason. So it's definitely been, a big honor to be tasked with this. And also too, we want to make sure that we do right by the community and then also right by the family. And I think, regardless of what people say, I think that it was very likely that the family kind of saw what came out. How could you not? Obviously, there's an aspect of wanting to answer the unanswered, whether or not they know what we know. Um, those documents that you found, especially the one with the CIA really not buying the lone gunman theory. I mean, for me, I was like, this has been so wild because historically you saw the Warren Commission said, nope, this is it. Here's the narrative. And then the media regurgitated for literally generations the same narrative. And now we're finding out that that was false.
Well, the people in the CIA themselves, right after the assassination, at a time when the government was emphasizing,
Mhm.
this one guy did it, don't worry. The CIA station in Miami had exactly the opposite conclusion, which is we have to go investigate the people we know in South Florida.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's the official narrative is dead on arrival after this hearing, and I just hope that all of that is reflected in the congressional record.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. You know, the Warren Commission account is, I mean, at best, it's outdated, it's defunct. But how do we develop a story with all this official secrecy laid on top of a lot of lies, laid on top of destruction of some evidence? How do we sort through that and get towards something that makes more sense, an explanation of of this great event that makes more sense?
Yeah, so I think final steps on this is because we know that there's been a lot of evidence that has been destroyed, and that timeline can be proved whether it was, as you had pointed out, the shredding of the Secret Service documents when they ordered them not to, whether it was literally the testimony of the Inspector General at the CIA, to I think it was the Warren Commission saying that they had recorded over Oswald's tapes. I mean, it's evident that there's been destruction of documents and of evidence that was needed to solve this. But I think that once we are able to track down some of those key documents that are outstanding, like the Joannides report that you're requesting and of which we're following up with on the CIA, I think that it's going to be important to probably write an official report. I would love to have an official investigation into this with forensic investigators, but I don't know that Congress would actually authorize the budget for that. And so for us, at least if we can't do that, the least that we can do is put our final findings, hopefully with your help, in a report and make that the official report of Congress.
Uh-huh. So you do plan to issue an official report on each of the areas that the task
Yeah.
force is covering?
Yeah, we'd like to. I think and that's too, because important as we're finding with the JFK community, you have a lot of like literally great, brilliant researchers, and they're able to build on top of each other's work. And I think that that's why we're so far along with being able to fully uncover what happened with John F. Kennedy, and largely to, your work and Mr. Oliver Stone's work. I mean, it's all contributed to what we're seeing today.
Well, I was just you know, interested when the new documents dropped on the 18th, and right away, I mean, I know the Washington Post, the editors of the Washington Post said that they had read all 77,000 pages and there was nothing in it
That's a
to
lot.
contradict the official story. I
Yeah.
mean, that was impressive. As speed reading goes, that's really impressive. I was not that fast. Um,
No.
but I did read the Angleton memos and this story that he had lied under oath to assassination investigators. You know, and now when I talk about this is an interesting phenomenon. Well, people say, well, that's no big deal. I mean, of course, CIA people lie under oath, and I'm like, why isn't
No,
that a
they're
big
not
deal?
supposed to, they're legally not supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, they're under oath, so they're supposed to tell the truth. They don't tell the truth. And then there's this idea, well, oh, you know, they were just incompetent. Huh? Like, this is a murder investigation.
Of
Somebody's
a sitting
lying in a murder
president.
investigation. That's not evidence of incompetence. That's
Yeah,
evidence of bad faith,
and it's not just like
So,
a
so
normal person, the president.
you have this, yeah, right? He was the president. And so, when I see that story, three top CIA officials lied about a presidential assassin, you know, is it any wonder that people are so cynical and skeptical about the assassination attempt on President Trump? And are they lying about that one too? Is it okay this time around too to lie about a presidential assassin? That's why that to me, that's why it seems like the accountability is so important because otherwise, nobody's going to believe the government about anything.
Well, it was
It's such a fundamental thing.
Yeah, it was interesting. Eugenio pointed out, who was testifying, that when America started to really distrust was after the official narrative came out from the Warren Commission, distrust their government. I keep emphasizing this, and it's like, Congress has like a historically terrible favorability rating among the American people, and they're just so sick of politicians. And, I'm in Congress, and so I see what happens with inside baseball, and I have the same opinion. But it got really bad with the Americans trusting their government after what happened with Kennedy. So I would actually say that really the breakup between the American people and the federal government happened then because of how they handled that. And so, it's weird to see people say, oh, well, we expected that out of the CIA, but we shouldn't expect that out of the CIA. I mean, the CIA should be working for the American
Right.
people. That's like having, an abusive relationship. You're like, oh, yeah, I mean, like, I'm okay with being abused. Like, no, it's so not right. So, there's an accountability mechanism here. And then, what we're learning too is like, my goodness, I'm sure every researcher will agree, but like the FOIA process, talk about a pain in the butt. That needs to be fixed. I mean, that's like just the tip of the iceberg with some of the stuff we'd like to reform. So yeah, there's a lot going on, but we're good multitaskers. A lot of people think, just because you're working on one legislation or you do a news hit that you're only just doing that, but Congress is multifaceted and you're doing about 100 different things all at once. I'm used to it now. When I first got in, I was like, this is literally information fire hose.
Well, I just want to tell the viewers here,
Yeah.
just, I wanted to know, could I work with you? And and I was so impressed with your can-do and proactive attitude. And I want to tell people, so I was at a meeting at Representative Luna's office, and I said, there's this file of this guy, George Joannides, and we have the paperwork. I've requested these records. They're being withheld under the Freedom of Information Act. Imagine JFK records are still being withheld under the FOIA. The JFK Records Act was passed because the FOIA was not a strong enough law, and
Hmm.
yet it has no effect on what. But anyway, the point is, when I asked you that, you turned to one of your aides and you said, take this over, send this to Ratcliffe, and call it to his attention, and we'll have a call about it. Like right then and there. I mean, that's leadership. That I've been around the JFK game for at least a decade in Washington, and that's the first time anybody showed any urgency about this. Like, let's solve this right now, not next week, not with after a study, right now. And so, I mean, I hope we get those documents. We haven't gotten them yet. But wow, that was a difference. So, when people say, is this going well? How's it? I was impressed with that attitude. And I thought, you know, we can work together if that's your attitude, because we've been looking in the JFK research community for a champion, for an open government champion who holds to the common sense, the overwhelmingly popular view that all this stuff should have been made public a long time
Well,
ago.
I think it was pretty cool too. Like the National Archives kind of assigned Chris Naylor to us. And so he has been super helpful. Like I remember he sent us the list. I think it was like 8 documents that we were still looking for. And so they're able to rip those documents for us. The Joe Needy stuff, we sent it to the CIA. They sent us the previously redacted version. And I was like, no, that's not what we're looking for. So they're hunting it down. And I think that was the last conversation that we had right before the hearing. And so obviously when we get back, we were sent home early this past
Mhm.
week. That's a separate conversation. But we seem to be on the right path here, and I think that history will show favorably on us that we did right by the American people. And it was a small group, right? There's 435 members. We had about what, like maybe 12 people on the task force, bipartisan. But I will say that compared to other committees, I think we held it together pretty well. So
Yeah, I was disappointed about the partisanship, like you
yeah,
were. It was really unnecessary, and
yeah.
uh, those other differences are important, but on an issue where everybody's together, like let's get this done, and then we can move on to the other things.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just say a couple of things in talking with the JFK research community. I'm not an expert on the RFK and MLK assassinations, but people associated with the Mary Farrell Foundation are.
Mhm.
Stu Wexler is on the House cold case, and he's an expert on the MLK files. And we also have people who are expert on the RFK files. So when your task force moves on to that, I'm not the person to talk to, but we do have people who know these bodies of records. And you know, these are not as scattered or as big as the JFK collection. And so I think, getting all the records together and getting anything that's not in view is an easier task maybe with these. Have you
Yeah, I
turned your
think
attention there yet?
and also too, I think that with all of these combined, I mean, there's such a big, I mean, like imagine what would have happened if these people weren't assassinated, the impact, obviously, with the civil rights movement that they had initially. So, I think that there's a lot of good stuff that's going to come out, but also too, I just hope that it's not, It's not partisan, and I don't think it will be. Obviously, there's a lot of family members still alive with all these individuals. So, I mean, moving forward, we've actually even talked to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about his father's assassination, and it's really interesting to watch his interviews and to get his perspective on what happened. But again, to the director of the CIA's credit, he's been big on this as well. And then also to Tulsi Gabbard, who I actually really like, and I just had dinner with her the other night. She's actually been put in charge of this effort from the White House. And so the White House wanted to ensure that they followed through on the president's order on this. And, to the National Archives credit as well, there's been a top-down overhaul in leadership with the archives. And so they were actually able to locate documents that were previously declassified for JFK under Biden, which a lot of people didn't realize Biden also tried to declassify, but that NARA never released them to the American people. So that was kind of an interesting thing to learn as well. So the archives, if you guys have a chance, go in person, you can see all these documents, but definitely a lot. I don't know how the Washington Post read through 77,000 pages. That's pretty wild. They should consider a job on the Hill.
One thing that came up in the hearing, and I think pretty much everybody regretted and
Mhm.
criticized, the publication of Social Security and other private information. And how did that happen? Do you know?
The National Archives initially, it was going to be some redactions, some of those items. And then when the authorization came through for no redactions, I think that the archives worked too quickly in just putting the information directly up because of the fact that they felt that they were up against a timeline. And so I think that that's how that happened. But to be clear, we are in the process. I know I talked to one of the individuals that was impacted by the release of that. And so we are advocating, and I know that the White House and the National Archives has been very quick to ensure that those people are being taken care of, whether it's being reissued another social security number and also having credit monitoring if they decide that they don't want to change their numbers. But obviously, there was a lot that was out there where I think if you want to have a fully, and initially they were going to do a redaction and then state what the redaction was. But I think because of what's happened with how this process played through, I think that people realized that they were serious about wanting to just have a fully transparent government. And so if you're seeing now, people are like, okay, well, there's not even redactions on that. So they feel confident in the authorized release. And so, it's unfortunate that that happened. However, they are on the back end fixing it.
Yeah. I should
Hmm.
I should mention there that the Mary Farrell Foundation, in posting these documents, is redacting all of that
Hmm.
personal information. That has actually delayed posting the documents on the site because we want to make sure all of that information is withheld in time.
Hmm.
Um, uh, the other topics that you're going on, are those next? Will we have another JFK hearing before another task force hearing? Do you
Well,
know?
we're in session, so it just really depends on the session calendar. I mean, we have some other interesting topics that we're covering, like UAPs. Some of that's being done in a skiff. There's going to be a hearing noticed here pretty soon for that, but we can have a UAP skiff brief on one day and a JFK roundtable the other, and these are all topics that are not interesting to us. So you'll see the members be more inclined to show up because they are topics of interest. I like to joke that, people they try to like label this as like the conspiracy theory caucus, and I was like, I think that I actually have one of the coolest jobs in Washington right now, right? Like I'm still voting on legislation, I still do constituent services, but in addition to that I get to answer and like have a discussion on some really cool topics. And so I always wanted to be a cop growing up. Like I think I suffered from the Scully syndrome where like women go into STEM once they watch the X-Files, and that's kind of what I feel like happened with me. So maybe I'm kind of on the side living out my um,
Uh,
dream of being an investigator.
well, right, but I mean, it is it is a big historical topic, and when you think about it, we're talking that something happened a long time ago. I'll
Mhm.
tell you how long ago. When I was in kindergarten. So, a long, long time ago, and yet here we are still talking about it. And so there's the unsolved aspect of it,
Mhm.
right? But what else is it? It's not just the unsolved aspect. What is it about Kennedy himself and his legacy that
It
makes the
was
story endure?
It was kind of like, I guess you could compare his story to Princess Diana, right? Like a young, charismatic, promising individual that really had ideas that were changing the way that we as a country moved forward, dealt with things. I mean, he was a cultural and historical icon. And then all of a sudden, he's killed. He's murdered. And I think when you draw the parallels there of, the country looked to him, they were arguably, in love with him as this young president with a beautiful family. And then all of a sudden to have it taken away, it did create this generational trauma that I think was passed on. Everyone knows about who John F. Kennedy is. Democrat, Republican, old, young, people know who he is. And so I think that's why it's contributed to wanting to do justice historically on what was done, the injustice on the narrative of what actually happened to him. And I would say that, it was Congress's fault for contributing to that distrust in government and also to contributing to the injustice of the investigation. They did not do right by him or the family. And so that's what we're trying to correct.
Yeah, and I feel like because there was no accountability then,
Mhm.
that had a profound impact on U.S. foreign policy,
Yeah.
on the impunity of the CIA, and not just on the, and we've already talked about breeding cynicism among the American people. I'm interested in, you know, we have a pretty diverse audience at JFK Facts. We don't really argue about, partisan
Mhm.
politics much, but I read the reader profiles of subscribers, and there's plenty of MAGA people in there. And we had a big contingent of RFK Jr. supporters when he was an independent candidate.
Mhm.
And we got, plenty of liberals and like that. And so what I see is, I think for conservatives, Kennedy is admired for his image of strength, but that's the way to preserve peace.
Mhm.
And that at bottom, the admiration for Kennedy among conservatives, it seems to me, is as almost ultimately as an anti-war candidate, that
Yeah.
a strong man, but a man who's so strong that he keeps the peace.
Mhm.
And then I think on the left, the liberal friends, they admire Kennedy for his wit, his intellect, his cosmopolitan, his tolerance, but also his strategy for peace, which he
Mhm.
talked about in his last year in office. And so I think for the common people on both the liberal and conservative side, Kennedy is an enduring memory or a kind of measuring stick for something that maybe we've lost in American politics, that vision of a strategy for peace. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I would argue that that's the same. A lot of people have a really bad taste in their mouth for the amount of defense contracting that goes into lobbying efforts with members of Congress. And it's interesting because whenever there's a conflict that happens, you'll see a lot of people come out and champion the need for that conflict. And then you can, see who's funding them. And
Mhm.
so, I've kind of been one of those people that, I saw firsthand what happened with a lot of my friends when I was in the military that deployed, came back, suffered from PTSD. I saw the meat grinder that war is on families and veterans. And then you see kind of the way that DC can be so just nonchalant about the efforts. And they'll say, well, if it doesn't happen over there, it's going to happen here. You see people that will vote on war not having skin in the game or see what happens with like the third and fourth order effects of that war. And so for me specifically, it is a personal perspective. Kennedy, interestingly enough, a lot of people remember this, but he was a vet. And so I think maybe that probably contributed to his viewpoint on foreign policy. And I would say that that's arguably why we need more vets elected to office. But, his perspective on war, as you saw, I think largely contributed to his rift with the CIA. And what we're finding out even today is that there was different organizations that were funded by the CIA in order to undermine oversight of Congress and the executive branch. And so that's a problem that I think just now is getting addressed, but it's been interesting to see the historical parallels. And so I look at this, I've always been big on history, and this is important for future generations to learn from so it doesn't repeat itself, but also to ensure that we live in a free and fair society.
One of the documents that got a lot of attention, and we were certainly calling attention to it, and got mainstream news coverage as well, was the memo that Arthur Schlesinger wrote to President Kennedy, and we got the fullest version yet of that
Mhm.
document. Did you look at that document and have any thoughts about it?
I have not fully looked it over. I remember we discussed it. I think you'd referenced it in the hearing. But when I think it was Schlesinger that said that the CIA, he wanted to overhaul, correct? That's the document that we're
Yeah,
referencing.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. So, I mean, it's a very reorganizing the CIA is the title of
Mhm.
of the memo. And anyway, I thought it was one of the most interesting things to come out because it does really tell. It makes the case of what people close to Kennedy were thinking. I mean, Kennedy wanted a plan to reorganize the CIA. He didn't ultimately do it, but these were the if he was going to do it, this he was had a powerful reasons why. And I mean, amazingly enough, this memo didn't come out for 62 years, precisely because it was critical of the CIA. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that just seemed wrong. Like, why wouldn't we want to know what a past president thought about the CIA, regardless of what he thought?
It was embarrassing for them. It's interesting. There's an article that just recently came out. It was actually on CNN that said that the CIA was concerned that disgruntled employees that left were going to sell state secrets to foreign actors. And I'm thinking, so they're talking about people committing treason because that's what it is. Uh, but that still the same issues that were at hand back then are still issues today, except now we have people that are for transparency. But there's still a lot of deep-seated, I think, things that need a spotlight shone on them. And so we're trying to do that, obviously now. But yeah, it's really crazy to me that the media did not cover this more, mainly because everything that you really pulled back and uncovered in these declassifications of documents. I mean, people said, well, the CIA never, they didn't cover up anything. It's like you had the CIA lying to Congress. Like, what do you mean they didn't help cover up something? This is crazy. So, yeah, I applaud you for going on record with that because I think when people saw it, you going to the press with it, and then also too, you were in the press, so you kind of know how this works. They really couldn't hit you because, you're arguably one of them, except you're a little bit smarter. So you handled it well.
Yeah. What's next? Not just on JFK, but you talked a little bit about Freedom of Information Act and the kind of the larger secrecy system. Are you looking to develop legislation or proposals for legislation more broadly about to address this problem of secrecy and overclassification and hiding of embarrassing information just for political reasons?
Yeah, I'd like to actually work with all the task force members on overhauling the FOIA system in the first place, and then also to the declassification process. I mean, we're coming up against the overclassification of documents, specifically in some of our other investigations as well. And that's been a problem because, for example, you might have a cell phone video of something, right? And if the military deems it a classified topic, they take that video, even though it hasn't been filmed on a classified platform or piece of technology, and then that can't get out to the American people. That's in my opinion an overclassification, especially if it's a personal cell phone video type of deal from a military member. So in my opinion, yes, that needs to be reformed. That would be the next goal and objective long term. But then also too, as I stated earlier, specifically to JFK, we want to submit an official report to the record on this. And then also too, I think that there needs to be a continuous push for the outstanding documents with these various agencies. And so, whether you want to call it me being nagging of these agencies, I guess I am being nagging of them, but that's part of our job. And so that's what we're doing currently.
So a couple of housekeeping questions.
Mhm.
Um, there were a whole body of JFK records at the National Archives, and they were the first ones to be released under the president's order. Have we received all of those documents? I mean, people talked about 80,000 pages, and Rex Bradford of the Mary Farrell Foundation tells me we're at 77,000 pages right
Yeah.
now. So is that complete, or will there be another release in the
There's going to
next week?
be There's supposed to be more releases. As far as we've been told, all documents have been handed over, but also too, not to dime anyone out of the archives, but I was overhearing a conversation. They're like, we don't have enough people to start scanning to go through all these documents. And there's still, I mean, there's a lot that they're going through all at once. And so I would still say keep an eye out for updates on the rest of those documents coming up. As soon as they get them scanned, they get them uploaded. And then also too, there was a specific piece of tech that they were looking for. I guess they had audio recordings. And so the archives had to go on eBay and purchase this piece of tech to listen to some of these recordings and upload them digitally. So that's been kind of interesting. You go to the archive and they have all these old machines to digitize, and a lot of it's from Kodak and Panasonic back in the 70s. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Um, well, what about have you developed a timetable for the MLK and the RFK documents? A lot of people have been asking me about that. The president's order
Mhm.
gave a little longer lead time. What can we look forward to in those areas?
So I actually have to ping Tulsi on that to kind of see what the timeline is that they're looking at, but that's still something that they were working on simultaneously. The only difference between the MLK and the RFK stuff is there's a lot more legally that they have to do to fight for some of the release of some of these documents, right? So there's, to my understanding, some court orders that ordered sealings. They obviously are pushing for max transparency, so they're going to have to go to court for some of these documents. But I do think that they will be successful. Obviously, the federal government has unlimited amount of attorneys to do things. And so I'm hopeful for that, but we'll be making an announcement soon on those timelines as soon as we get that. And as soon as I get back to DC, that's really going to be our next focus in addition to the other classified skiff briefing that we have coming up.
Why don't we take some questions?
Perfect. Yeah.
People have been asking questions in the chat. A couple of them, one of them I can answer because people have been asking a lot about this. Rick asked, "What about the FBI files?" The FBI files that were found in February in response to the president's orders have been turned over to the National Archives. Some reporters from JFK Facts have gone to see those files. So they are, and the National Archives tells me that they're in the process of digitizing, cataloging those. They
Mhm.
didn't have a date for release, but they assured me that it was happening. So I think that's the answer to your question, Rick. Um, Anna asked, could you comment on the Schlesinger memo? We talked about that. So you know, people are asking some very specific questions. I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. It's very micro. Um, uh, Jesse Curry and Henry Wade, Dallas law enforcement officials, both said it was a smudged fingerprint on the gun. Was there ever a clear print after Oswald was killed and clear print on the gun? I don't, I couldn't say, I couldn't speak to what those two men said. So I don't know if you know anything about that or have come across that in your
So I
research.
actually saw that referenced in, I believe it was Oliver Stone's documentary. And the one thing that Mr. Stone brought up at the testimony, he said the chain of custody for the rifle needs to be investigated because there was something wrong about it. And he said actually that's why he encouraged there to be a reopening of the investigation. A lot of people surrounding the firearm used by Oswald there's some pretty big things that stuck out and said, no, this doesn't add up right. Whether it was the fact that what Oswald was photo with, what he testified to, said, I don't remember taking that photo. That's not that, and also to the rifle that he ordered in the catalog was different from the rifle that they put up and said that he shot the president with, in regards to where the actual sling went on the rifle. And so there's a lot there that Mr. Stone said needed to be looked at, but I can't speak any more than other than what he testified to.
Right. Yeah, I mean the whole chain of custody
Mhm.
thing, kind of an elementary thing in any homicide
Investigation, yeah.
case, and there really is no chain of custody either with the bullets or the gun.
Hmm.
I mean, none that would survive a lot of scrutiny in a courtroom.
Exactly.
I
The
guess
hard
I would put it,
evidence.
I
Mhm.
would put it that way. Um, uh, Kit asked, talking about the Warren Commission, the single bullet theory, that one bullet caused seven wounds in two different people. What do you think about the single bullet theory? That idea that the
Oh,
bullet,
yeah, there was a company out of Colorado that put together a forensic analysis. They actually deal in forensics, and they took millions of these data points actually in Dallas where Kennedy was shot, and they recreated the single bullet theory and actually disproved it from a scientific perspective and said it was not have been possible for that bullet to have done what the Warren Commission alleged. And so that has been categorically disproven. I said that I didn't believe in that, and people were like, oh, this is, international news. And then look, we not only have the forensics of that, but then also too, the CIA rejected the notion of lone of the single bullet theory too. So, and lone gunman. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, yeah. That recreation project was done by John Orr, former assistant U.S. attorney, and I saw he demonstrated that model for some of us, and the precision of it was very
Yeah.
impressive. And I hope that it would be great if that could be on a website with a good interface and people could kind of see it walk through it for themselves, because
Enter it into the archives, be like, I think you should put this up. It's, I'll enter it as a historical document, put it on the front page of the JFK files.
yeah. Um, let's take some other questions. Mark Lobel says, talking about the documents that you haven't obtained, the Joannides files and other things, what's the delay? And is Ratcliffe cooperating?
Yeah, Radcliffe is cooperating to the best of his ability, right? The actual files that we're looking for, and when I actually I literally wrote Radcliffe's team. I said, "Hey, we're looking for this Joannides file." They sent me the previously redacted version. I think I showed it to you. You're like, this is the
Yeah,
one we're
yeah.
looking for.
Right.
So they're
That
fine.
document was released in 1998. It was like, nice try, guys.
Yeah, no, I sent it
Drawing
back and
board.
said, this is not what we're looking for. And so going back and forth between the archives and the CIA, and granted, there's a whole new bunch of people at the CIA right now, so they're probably just like, this Luna office is so demanding. But yeah, no, we're going back and forth, going through it, and then also to any other outstanding documents. I think of the 20 that we sent over, I feel like we got about half. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we got about half. So we're still trying to locate 10 documents specifically. And so that's going to be kind of up to date. I'll message you and David and be like, hey, I just need my up to date list of outstanding documents. And then I'm going to send it over to Chris Naylor with the archives and the CI and be like, this is still outstanding. Please find it.
One thing that people have noticed is um, that there are still redactions in some of these documents,
Yeah.
which I don't know how that slipped through, or is there a process, with the archives or a feedback loop where we can say, hey, look, this document still has redactions,
I
or
would say give it to our team. Right now, as you know, the archives is pretty minimally staffed compared to what they probably need to do the full declass process. But typically, how it worked is that if you had a redacted document, it would go back to the originating agencies to take away the redactions, and then would come back to the archives. But they really fast tracked that process with the order for automatic declassification and no redaction. And so there's probably going to be a few documents, but send them to us or flag it for your team, and then we'll send it to the archives for just to flag it for them. Because I think right now they're just doing direct upload scans.
yeah. Um, Here's a question from reader. It's directed at me. You said
Mhm.
on Twitter you found an interesting new Oswald document, but I didn't hear anything else about it. What we have now, reader, is we have the CIA's complete pre-assassination file on Lee Harvey Oswald, which was not fully declassified, incredibly enough, until April 2023, 60 years after the crime. So that's what I was referring to. The interesting new Oswald document is the CIA's complete pre-assassination file on Oswald, which, here's a plug, you can get by subscribing to JFK Facts. You can get a free copy, not available anywhere else. Let me say that. So um, another question that came up,
Mhm.
a lot of news. We talked about it at the hearing. The question of this film that might show the entrance to the Texas School Book Depository at the time of the assassination. Two films that might shed light on that. Uh, we have copies of those films, but we haven't seen the original, and the originals might have more information or more clarity on them.
Mhm.
What's going on with this? In the JFK research community, we've been familiar with this debate for a long time, and not. I mean, I think the consensus of people I knew was an interesting piece of evidence, but very hard to tell. It's a murky image. And I'm not sure that the new images would do something. Are you pursuing this? How important is this?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important at least to put the questions to bed and allow the American people to decide that for themselves. I would argue that they should release that in good form for the American people. But we are sending an official letter to request that. Actually, to my knowledge, the letter's already gone out to NBC and just asking for them to show us. I don't want to be combative with NBC because I think right now that they probably will if their heart's in the right place. Now, if we're getting stonewalled, I think that's a different story. But right now, we're going to ask for that to be released and to see the actual copy, and then obviously share that with the American people.
I felt like if they could make that available for a high resolution digital scan in a process that was observed by independent observers who could look at the original and make sure that you know, why wouldn't that be a reasonable solution? It doesn't cost NBC anything. It's not,
If anything, it's a thank you to NBC, right? So, look, we want to get as much information out, and I think that we have the ability to do it. And so, I would actually want to plug your team. We've been working really closely with you guys in order to, I think, navigate this entire process. And I think that's where previous investigations just didn't do a good job, as they were not willing to take guidance and counsel from people that knew better than them. So I will say that you're an expert. I am not necessarily an expert. So
Mhm.
I heed to your counsel on certain things.
Um, One reader asks, would you consider issuing a subpoena to former CIA Director Mike Pompeo to testify about what happened surrounding the initial postponement of JFK records in October 2017? Just for people, the background of that question is it was Mike Pompeo who recommended to
Blocked
President
it.
Trump.
Yeah.
And I
I
don't think
would
there's any
love.
dispute about this,
Yeah, I
that
know.
he
Yeah, that's
recommended it.
actually been publicly admitted to by certain people. I will say that I would love to, but Chairman Comer holds subpoena power and authority, so I can ask him, Chairman, I would like to have this subpoena, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to get it. Although I think Mr. Pompeo would probably not like a subpoena from Congress, and so maybe we should consider sending him one.
Well, it was puzzling. I mean, when you look at the material that
Mm.
came out on March 18th, did you see anything that couldn't have been released 8 years ago?
No, it was interesting. It was like he was trying to save face for the CIA. And also, too, a lot of this information had come out in various documentaries. We just never had the hard evidence of it. So if it was already officially out there, I don't know what they were waiting on. But the fact that they did wait was ridiculous because it only contributes to more distrust with the federal government and various intelligence agencies. So I don't know why they had that for so long.
I think you answered this before, but one viewer asked directly, have you and the task force asked the committee for the Joannides personnel file the way I requested?
Yeah, yeah, we actually sent your direct request. I think you were in the room when we were writing the CIA. Like you were
Yeah.
actually like they were sending the email in the other room and you're like, this is what we need. So we sent it on over.
Yes. People are asking these very, like specific questions like that I would ask, I mean, these would be challenging questions for any JFK researcher. And I'm not sure you have thoughts about the postmortem skull x-rays.
Yeah, I actually saw there's a great documentary on Paramount Plus. It's called What the Doctors Saw, and what all of these doctors said, and then also two people that were actually at the autopsy in Maryland. One of the autopsy techs said that there was clearly something that happened with them not being transparent about the skull and then also to the after postmortem photos. And so, yeah, I have massive questions. Actually, Mr. Stone also said that that's part of what we need to follow up on is the postmortem autopsy of President Kennedy. Everyone that was at the initial hospital in Dallas did not have the same opinion of what the official report was on the autopsy for President Kennedy. And that's been, you're talking to doctors that were actually there in the room that actually came out years later. A lot of them have since passed away. And, end of life, they're saying this ain't right. So they actually went on record about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's refreshing to hear you say that because if you look at the historical record, it's very plain what the Dallas doctors saw and even what the Bethesda witnesses at the autopsy saw which was a wound that seemed to have been caused by a gunshot from the front. I mean,
It's
several dozen people have said this, so
yeah.
it's not an irrational conclusion.
No, it's not an irrational conclusion. And you saw multiple people that were like, these photos do not look like what we saw. I don't know why you would convince people that are near death to lie like that. So I don't believe that they're lying. And also, too, it's not just like one or two people, it's literally like over a dozen people saying this. So, again, going back to the official narrative, I also found it very disturbing that people that had questions that initially challenged the actual narrative that they were pushing ended up committing suicide in various weird ways. And so, I'm thankful that we're decades past this, but also too, I don't think that we'd be able to answer or ask some of these questions because I think that back then there was probably a lot of bad people surrounding this narrative.
Um, Talking about living witnesses, a
Hmm.
couple of the Dallas doctors are still alive. Have you thought about calling them as witnesses? Do you think they could add to what we know?
We tried to find their contact informations and we were actually calling the hospitals that they had worked for. And I was actually asking to get a private investigator involved to see if I could track them down. And we were not able to find their contacts prior to us. Now, if you have a
Okay,
contact, I would
I
love
do.
to. Good. I would love to have them.
I do. I have found one of those doctors, and I think that my contact says he is willing and would like to talk about
Oh,
his
I would love
experience.
that round table. I'm telling you, like we'll have that round table as soon as we get back. That is we're looking so hard for that. And the staff of investigators that we have, I mean, they were tracking down people, calling the hospitals. I literally was like, are we allowed to use committee funds to pay for an investigator to track down these witnesses? Or like, Luna, pump the brakes.
Another person who several people have recommended as a witness, also fairly old. Do you know the story of Abraham Bolden,
Mm-mm.
the Secret Service agent in Chicago, who talked about
Oh,
first?
yeah. Yeah, he actually talked about the good old boy system in the Secret Service, and then he was later on charged, and I think President Biden pardoned him in
Yes,
2022. I
yes.
actually just, so right before the committee, I was looking into his story and I said, this guy would make a great witness. I actually sent him to Robert Garcia, who's the minority chair of the task force, and they didn't make contact. But no, he would be great too, because his story is pretty interesting for those people who might not know it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that the only person at the Secret Service who lost their job after the president was assassinated was the
Okay.
guy who tried to do something about it. And Abe Bolden had pointed out that security was lax, and he had a whole range of things that he said should be addressed. And for his trouble, he was railroaded and framed and sent to jail. It was really
Yeah, it was framed, and then I read that in 2022 you got an official pardon from Biden, but I mean, there was, there was three attempted assassinations on Kennedy leading up to the Dallas, or two previous ones to Dallas, and then Dallas was successful, unfortunately. But yeah, there's been a lot of, I think, things that have flushed out. We would love to have those people at the round table. And so if you have those contacts, send them on over. I actually have to get going here though, but I'd be happy to come back
okay.
on and discuss our next task force roundtable. And thank you so much for testifying. You did great.
Anna, thanks a million for coming. This has been a very
Of course.
interesting show. I thank you on behalf of all our audience. And, you know, I am very impressed with your work. This is a great start, and I hope, that we can continue it. So thanks for
Yeah.
your leadership, and let's be in touch.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. We'll wrap up our show, everybody. Questions, comments, send them our way at JFK Facts. You can see that Representative Luna is very in tune and committed to this issue. People have questioned me about that. And, she has proven to me that she's a good partner, the best partner we've ever had on this. So while we have our differences, I think it's a very productive relationship. And I do think we are making progress. So thank you, everybody. If you didn't hear the whole thing, it will be posted on JFK Facts soon, both in video and in podcast form.